I now want to move on to chapter 2, which is about the role of philanthropy. What is the role of philanthropy in the new, let's say, the cultural deal for Europe? And in this particular chapter, I have both someone who's the chief of the European Cultural Foundation, but I also have a commissioner who has spoken boldly and loudly about the importance of this issue, Mariya Gabriel. Mariya Gabriel is also, it's a very warm welcome to you, Mariya, to this discussion, and also one of our European young leaders at Friends of Europe. So Mariya, I want to turn to you first. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello, a warm welcome to you. Good to see you again.
Good to see you, André. Thank you.
Good, good. So, Mariya, what I want to ask you is, what's your sense of how? I mean, you've done a number of amazing things in this, let's say, crisis period, where you've kind of mobilized a hackathon, you've mobilized communities to give, you've upped the ante around some of this discussion around culture and arts, Mariya. So, in terms of the reaction to what you've heard so far, where do you stand currently on this? Because I'll turn to André in a moment in terms of the impact of the philanthropic euro in Europe in the culture and arts space. It is significant, we know. I'll leave André to answer some of those issues around the percentages and the data, but it feels like there's a missing opportunity to combine and make the most of a partnership between public funding and philanthropic funding in a new way for the cultural deal and the recovery of Europe. Mariya, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Allow me to start by thanking Tere from Culture Action Europe and Snezhka from Europa Nostra for the organization of this event, because this is only the second edition to this La Rentrée, but I'm convinced, Snezhka and Tere, that it will turn into an unmissable event, gathering all the stakeholders involved in the field of culture. And for this, I would like really to express all my congratulations. Well, President Sassoli said it very well. Culture is not a secondary aspect of our society. And I would like to start from here. Culture has always and will always be at the center of our lives. But now, to achieve a cultural deal for Europe, we need definitely first to recognize the importance of culture and therefore be sure that this is part of our recovery. That's why I listened so carefully the previous speakers. Sabine Verheyen explained it very well in this first part of the discussion, because our work over the past months focused on this aspect. And before arriving to philanthropy, I think that it's very important just at least again to enumerate all these initiatives. First, we need to continue all to stay very mobilized, to speak with one voice, unified, to be united, to make sure that culture and creative sectors could benefit from all the horizontal instruments and financial support put forward at the beginning of the crisis. Second, including culture as beneficiary of the other European programs and initiatives beyond the initial ones, including REACT-EU, InvestEU, Digital Europe, Cohesion Fund. Third, promoting the unique opportunity of the Recovery and Resilience Facility. I can only here express again my strong support and thank you the European Parliament for their call to earmark for the cultural and creative sectors and industries at least 2% of the Recovery and Resilience Facility. I fully support this proposal. Thank you very much, Sabine. But this is now up to all of us to promote this idea to our member states. I will do it in 2 weeks' time at the occasion of our informal video conference of the Ministers of Culture. Fourth, designing stronger instruments and creating synergies among themselves. Here, that was raised just before. I think of Creative Europe, Erasmus+, Horizon Europe, because especially for the first time in Horizon Europe, we have a new cluster dedicated to culture and cultural heritage. We'll have a new kick with the European Institute of Innovation and Technology. And now what I would like to say, thank you very much for the additional financial support European Parliament and the good news last week. That will be up to us to use this opportunity. But if you want a cultural deal for Europe, I think that we need to go beyond the inclusion of culture in the recovery. This means to rethink our interaction with the sector, with foundations like the European Cultural Foundation, to be able to support the sector in another way. The European Cultural Foundation, at the peak of the crisis, launched the Culture of Solidarity Fund, gathering philanthropic, public and private funding to support cultural projects. And from the beginning, I strongly supported this initiative, presenting it to the member states and the informal video conference of the Ministers of Culture on 18th of April, the first dedicated to the COVID-19 and its impact on the sector. And I will never forget the faces of our ministers. So we need to continue to be vocal and stay united. Outside of the European Union, foundations in many different domains are flourishing, and philanthropy is a tool regularly used. This is not the case for the time being in the European Union. And initiatives such as the Culture of Solidarity Fund are interesting, and we should definitely explore possible ways to support them, because alternative sources of funding can be extremely helpful. And on our side, looking especially and specifically at cultural heritage, the topic of alternative sources of financing is included in the work plan for culture for 2019-2022. Within this framework, beginning of next year, we'll hold together with member states a workshop on this topic. I think that we should seize the momentum, especially because, Snezhka, I see you, we are thinking about for the next steps already. Moreover, the Future Creative Europe program, although we are still finalizing the negotiations, specifically opened the door for increased synergies with other European funding programs to find additional funding solutions to the cultural and creative sector. We should address these too. And in this context, I'm willing to organize a dedicated workshop to explore this possibility. Philanthropy, however, last point, can only be one element of the cultural deal. To be complete, what is needed is a full engagement of our citizens. And this engagement will happen first by turning political initiatives into societal and cultural projects. The European Green Deal will only be possible if all our citizens will endorse it, understand it, and they don't see it as a threat, but they can see the European Green Deal as a driver. And only culture will be able to do this. The music sector has already started moving along this line with the Music Declares Emergency. I count on the other sectors to do the same, especially because we have now the proposal of the president for the new European Bauhaus initiative. Bridge between on one side science and technology, on the other art and culture. I will always pay attention, dear Sabine, that we should preserve the bottom-up approach. We need really here to involve our cultural and creative sectors. And I think that means that we should pay attention to a second aspect, engaging with citizens directly.
Yes.
And here I'm thinking about the conference on the future of Europe. It's really time that we are playing an active role in this conference, because I can't imagine the future of Europe without culture, creative sectors, and all these extraordinary talents that we have. So I think that here we should really be more proactive. Why not? And I'm thinking of another new element. It's our missions in Horizon Europe program.
Exactly.
But
yes.
now the challenge is really how to share this information regularly and how to define common actions, and especially after to see how they can be implemented. So what I'm very glad here to share finally with you, that I fully believe that we need to integrate another level. It's the regional level. There is an important role to play by our regions. And that's why I'm so glad that together with President Tzitzikostas, we worked on a joint action plan for the next 2 years that will establish a list of 26 actions in 4 priorities areas. So you know me, culture will be one of those 4 areas, and that will be presented next week. So my please here, please pay attention to the initiatives that you'd like to propose and help us to realize them. So I will stop here, dear André,
Really?
ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you.
Really, I look forward to hear our exchanges and to answer to your questions.
Mariya, as ever, you know, in my experience of you is you've always come prepared and you've always had a very clear sense of passion, and you're not just kind of giving us, you know, fluffy words. There's specific things that you are identifying, and it's good to hear that. And it's good that, you know, those are the audience. I hope we've noted it, and I hope that all the cultural institutions have tweeted this, the fact that you've agreed to hold a workshop, which is great, which is a very specific action. But if I may ask you, before I invite Andre in from the European Cultural Foundation, Mariya, you know, I mean, from my previous experience of moderating with you on other occasions, whether that's to do with Africa or digital skills or etc., we have this sense of a Team EU approach. Say a little bit about whether you've got the back, or have your fellow college of commissioners got your back on this? You know, is there a sense that the passion you're demonstrating and communicating here is shared across the college? And the second point is that when you talk about the Conference of the Future of Europe, it feels like a, you know, dead duck. And say that with all respect, there's no sense of where it is and who's running it and what the plans are. And I obviously expect that, you know, the COVID environment and the crisis has put it off course, but there's, at least from our sense, there's no sense of what it is, what's happening and where it is. How do you involve people as a result? So Mariya, back to you. Challenging questions, I know, but it's important.
Yes, that's exactly that. Team Europe approach, that means that since the beginning, by the very end, we are working together. That means that we need not only to create and identify synergies, but after to follow very closely the implementation together. Because when we talk about culture and creative sectors, yes, I'm responsible for Erasmus Plus, Horizon Europe. Good, we have here some very good instruments. But what about the European Regional Development Fund? That's why since the beginning, I'm working together with Commissioner Ferreira. What about the skills that we need really to equip our young people if you'd like to engage them in this extraordinary diversity of culture and cultural heritage? That's why we are working together with Commissioner Smith. The same, when I talked about our missions on climate change, I'm very glad that since the beginning, all the other commissioners supported this, especially because we were very clear in that the recommendations of our chair's board, culture is an integral part. So please pay attention to this. Now the question, it will be really the next only few months. We don't have so much time. First, of course, for me, it's to finalize the negotiations with the European Parliament, to be very clear, to have after our work program and to identify the main priorities. What I would like to see is that the next 6 months, we are able to show our capacity to have some, not 50, but 5 priorities that we are able to scale at European level. And I think that during the crisis, we have seen that is possible. I'm always thinking here about Creative Unite platform with more than 26,000 people registered, more than 600 contributions. First time in June that at this level we organize this. And first time that I have seen that the extraordinary diversity of the sector that not means that this is an obstacle to speak with one voice, to exchange practices and to advance together.
What about the Conference of the Future of Europe, Mariya?
For the Conference of the Future of Europe, since the beginning, I'm in close contact with the Vice President of
No, I know. It's not about your communication. No, it's not about your communication. Where is it at? It feels like a dead duck, as I was saying. Is it still alive and kicking?
Absolutely, but there is some internal procedures and details where every institution is paying attention to this, but it's on a good way, and that will be definitely very soon started. I'm very glad that we already contributed with the voices of culture, of young people. I'm thinking about citizens platforms with the Joint Research Center. We have an experience on this, and that was already taken on board, so I'm very glad. But we need to continue to insist that our voice matters and we have things to say important, because that's crucial for the future of Europe.
Thank you. Okay, I won't challenge you even further, but thank you for being direct and frank about some of these matters. And those of you on the audience, put on your comments in relation to the Conference on the Future of Europe. If you know where it's at, good for you. Then why don't you share that with others? And obviously, again, that's that consistent message about organize, engage, and as we've said, as Mariya said, there are a number of challenges now in the next few months. How do you make sure that these three organizations were bringing this event together, but link back to you to make sure that that pressure is felt, but also that voice of reason around arts and culture? I want to now move on to André. André, welcome.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, indeed.
Super.
Welcome, warm welcome to you. So it's quite interesting to come on the back of what Mariya's been saying, because actually that from someone who is steeped in a range of issues, is articulating very clearly the importance of the sector and what she needs, and a commitment to hold a workshop on taking some of this forward. What's your reaction? And say a little bit about what you think the power of the philanthropic euro is in this particular deal.
Okay, thank you. And I have to say the discussion beforehand on the cultural deal and the importance of the cultural sector has been very rich, and I congratulate my colleagues on that. So I don't want to talk about that. I want to talk about how we can make it happen. Not why we want to make it happen, but how we can make it happen. Mm-hmm. And we all agree these are extraordinary times. I'm basically a child of 89 when the Berlin Wall came down, and I thought this was my defining moment. And now I don't know whether it was, because these are even bigger, extraordinary times. And to be honest, Europe had a very slow and uncoordinated start. And in March, I actually was afraid that this could be Europe's Titanic moment. But after initial hesitation, the EU and the member states raised up to the challenge and agreed really, again, an extraordinary recovery package and funded by previously unimaginable Eurobonds. I mean, you talked about that. And I think these extraordinary times, they're also extraordinary times for extraordinary measures. And some of them were already mentioned also by Commissioner Gabriel and by President Sassoli and Ms. Verheyen. But I think that's why I think now this actually could be a European moment. And the European Cultural Foundation was created 65 years ago to create or help to promote a European sentiment, a European sense of belonging. And I think out of this crisis, after the initial hiccups, we could actually grow a European sentiment, a European moment of solidarity. But and that brings me to the issue of that Baustein 2, the second component of this session. How could that happen? And is that actually only something which we can rely on to the European Union and the member states? And I think that's not enough. And when Mr. Gozzi talked about the Renaissance and what came out of that in terms of the culture sector, it wasn't because governments had to intervene. It came out of civil society, it came out of the art sector, it also came out of philanthropy. And I think we are in this together. This is not just an issue for government. And that's why I believe it could be also, and it should be also, a citizens' moment, a European citizens' moment. That's what I see in this. And that brings me back to the European sentiment. So what can philanthropy do in this? You asked about the figures. Foundations in Europe spend a combined 60 billion euros per year, not counting the foundation's endowment. And around 43% of the EFC membership, the European Foundation Center membership, works in art and culture, representing an estimate 22 billion spent annually. Okay, you might say that's peanuts compared with the 750 billion that's now on the table. But this is money spent across Europe very locally, because most foundations work at a very local level, work in communes, in small cities, in villages, in rural regions. So this is an important part of the ecosystem. And Commissioner Gabriel mentioned how we, as the European Cultural Foundation, reacted. We created, for us, a very big fund, and we got other European foundations to be part of it, and that already in March. And many other foundations in Europe have reacted in a similar way, often at a very local level, especially also in places like Italy, in Portugal, in Southern Europe, and that has been great. I think because of that, because of what the commissioner was saying, what the president was saying about what the EU is doing, what the EU is planning, and what I have been saying about the role of the philanthropy, if we manage to combine these things, coordinate these things, align these things in a good way, then we can achieve much more, and maybe even in the context of a next renaissance. Also, I have to be a bit careful, because why should we just replicate the Renaissance or the Bauhaus if we can invent something totally new, a real European thing, for a starting point European, and not just a rerun of what we had hundreds or 100 years ago. So that's what I really have in mind, and I want to see how we can make that happen. The commissioner has talked about the things we can do, about the workshop. We have, to be honest, found it hard to find a way to combine these resources. And despite the commissioner's a big speech before the culture ministers and many other efforts, it's still tricky to get its way through the discrete charm of the bureaucracy. And I also not only mean the EU bureaucracy, I also mean foundations bureaucracy. So how do we combine these things in a good way? That is my question. And we are open to this as a European Culture Foundation. We will publish a study this week together with the Allianz Kulturstiftung on how we can actually grow out of this crisis a real European philanthropy. I mean, a philanthropy with a European purpose, and what could be the role in the workings with the European Union. We have in mind a European public philanthropic matching fund, but there are all sorts of other ways of achieving this. The question is how we can do it. We are open. We think there's a lot of potential, and I think it is actually needed, because this cannot just be a government moment. This has to be a citizens'
absolutely,
and a moment where everyone comes together, because you know, only this way we can make it.
Absolutely. And there's something about philanthropy adding value to the broader society, and its role being independent and being able to really support in a way without not many strings attached, in a way that gives, you know, breathes life into community and individuals, and be able to do a number of things. But you gave some interesting figures there. Very briefly, if you may, because I want to bring in some reactions, is that knowing the sector that you do, the philanthropic sector in mainland Europe, continental Europe, what chance do you think you have of bringing them together around this? Because we've heard constantly that we need a unified march. You know that actually there is the potential for the philanthropic sector in Europe to perhaps provide seed corn funding to be able to mobilize communities. And even having worked in the UK as head of a very large funder, one of the things that we did was create social impact bonds. I've never seen a social impact bond which has obviously been used on things like recidivism, Green Deal, childcare, but on culture. And I wonder what if you know, Europe could be a first in creating a social impact bond which matches philanthropic money, private sector money, and public money in a way that creates more sustainability to the monies that we're talking about right now. Just a quick reaction to that thought, Andre.
Well, on the first one, it's funny that you mention it. You know, the European Culture Foundation is based in the Netherlands, in Amsterdam. And when the first discussion about the recovery package and potentially using bonds was raised, and then there was a group called the Frugal Four. Apparently, they're now Frugal Five. We said no, we can't do that, and we at that point had the idea to create Eurobonds. So the European Cultural Foundation creating cultural Eurobonds. But then we looked into it. For us, it wasn't the right way. It needs foundation with a bigger endowment. But
Yes.
the philanthropic sector is actually open to it, and it is discussed. For example, in the US, there's a consortium of foundations who are working on bonds as a measurement, as a way of addressing this crisis, but also for the future. And I think there's a discussion also within the philanthropic sector to do similar things. And I think it's only an indication that everything is on the table. This is such a crisis that you have to be creative to get out of it. And you won't do it by doing rerunning things which you have done before. You have to step out of your comfort zone.
That's right.
That's what the philanthropic sector is currently doing.
Great, good to hear.
Whether it's other means, and that's where also comes to the issue of philanthropic public partnership. It's not something which foundations line up to do naturally. Because they will have to agree on something. There must be compromise. But when there is such a statement, and this statement also comes from the European Foundation Center and Daphne, the network of national foundation centers, then it's really because they think this is a particular time and it needs to be done. And I think it's a good sign. It doesn't mean that everything has to be centralized. It only means that you have to have vehicles where it is possible to combine it. And these vehicles exist to a certain extent at regional level already. Some of them also at national level, also then it's becoming a little bit more thin. And now we are talking how we can use this particular moment in time, this crisis, as an opportunity to create also these kind of vehicles in a positive manner, not only for the crisis, but also for beyond.
I'll take two very quick reactions. We have Giuliano de Empoli. Giuliano?
Hello.
Hello. Welcome.
Thank you.
Very briefly, if I can get a reaction from you to what you've heard so far. You've been involved in this. You're based in a think tank. You've been author. Let me get this right. 7 ideas for a European cultural recovery plan.
Well, thank you, first of all, for this very interesting discussion. I think since we're discussing about a cultural deal for Europe, it would be a good idea maybe to go back 1 second to the original New Deal. And I think what was so special about Franklin Delano Roosevelt's New Deal in the 30s is not just that he decided to invest in culture, that he understood that if you wanted to open a new phase, a new era for the United States at that time and defeat national populist forces at that time that were very powerful, you didn't just need the serious subjects, infrastructure policy and welfare state and all that stuff, but you also needed to involve the creative energies of the arts and culture. But what's more relevant, and I think less known, is the way he did it. He didn't just put money into it. He changed the approach of funding the arts. And instead of just involving artists into like gentle, rhetorical, nice projects about the American dream or making America great again or whatever, he didn't shy away from controversy. He funded projects and programs that were openly controversial and problematic. It was the first slave narrative studies. It was the first studies of migration, about the condition of the original American Indians. It was all kind of issues that were problematic at the time. He kind of raised them and encouraged artists and creators to go into that.
So is
And
that your
that's what
point? Is that your
scares
point
me.
that you want
I
to bring in
think-
a different kind of ways of, it's not just the money, it's about how it's spent. So I need you to be brief because I need to move on.
I think it's about how it's spent. If you stay into the consensus, traditional European culture of, Europe is good for peace and solidarity and all that
Yep.
stuff, and let's avoid controversy at any cost. Let's not
Yes.
put faces on those euro notes. I think it's so much better that we start finding ways to enrich controversy and maybe put the wrong faces on the euro notes, and maybe fund all kinds of programs that are highly controversial instead. And this really implies changing the rules of engagement between the European Commission and private subjects. And that's where the philanthropy can be really important in pushing the boundaries.
The boundaries and be a spark of a different nature. Giuliano, thank you so much. Valuable, and it's also a good reminder of what happened with the original deal. And there is something there to be learned around. Actually, you need to be able to really upend some of these narratives by being brave, but as long as you've got the money behind you also too. I want to go quickly to Gijls de Vries. Gijls, you've been a politician at both a national level in the Dutch government. You've been an MEP, you've been in the Dutch audit office, etc., and you're now at the European Institute at the LSE. Briefly, give us your reaction to what you've heard so far, given those various hats that you've had, and a warm welcome to you.
Thank you. I think we've just heard two very important contributions from Mariya Gabriel and André Wilkens. Both of you have identified a huge strategic opportunity for Europe. Mariya Gabriel has told us how she's working to tie culture in with other policy agendas so that it becomes more visible how important culture is for the greening of Europe. How culture can contribute to the digital agenda, how Europe can be part of the new skills package of Europe, and how culture can be part of Europe's international cooperation. All those are possibilities to put culture on the map politically and also in the thinking of people. And I think that's essential, because if culture is to fully flourish and contribute to fighting nationalism and inward-lookingness, it needs to be perceived as a relevant force, not just for the cultural sector itself, but for society as a whole. So 3 cheers to Mariya. Anything we can do to support that broader cultural agenda, I think would be very valuable. And André, you've just outlined one way of doing that. It is by broadening the alliance of positive forces in Europe, tying culture and philanthropy together. Finding areas where the two can be mutually supportive for this positive agenda to counter the nationalism and negativity. One way of doing this, but there can be many, is to have a few thematic teams where philanthropy and culture can work together and support the EU agenda. Take, for example, this is just one example, the Sustainable Development Goals. All our countries have accepted to implement them. But implementation is slow, and the role of culture is yet to be developed. So what we can do is take, for example, the theme of education, arts education. What can philanthropic organizations and cultural organizations jointly do to support European and global arts education with the support of the EU? Then you hit two nails on the head. You strengthen Europe's agenda, you make Europe more visible in the world, and you contribute to the Sustainable Development Goals. So 2 very important contributions, and I very much look forward to the rest of this discussion.